Normandy, UK Armed Forces are performing a parachute drop now, honouring those that came before them 80 years ago. We're currently watching members of the UK Armed Forces drop down in the same sort of parachutes that we would have seen those paratroopers use back in June 1944.
And what a glorious picture that is. What a glorious day in Normandy. These are the paratroopers from the 16 Air Assault Brigade. There you go, landing there on the grass. They're from the Assault Brigade Combat Team, and they're jumping from a Royal Air Force A400M transport aircraft. Can you count how many there are, Tom, for us?
Oh, I wouldn't hasten to count, because I think we've got more planes coming.
Yes.
And of course, this is all part of what is a two-day commemoration event, not only in Normandy, but across the Channel in Portsmouth as well. Remembering what happened 80 years ago this week, how Western Europe was liberated, first by those parachute drops of British and American service personnel, followed by those amphibious landings, the largest amphibious landings in the history of the world. 150,000 people crossing the Channel to retake Western Europe.
What a beautiful sight that is, those parachutes dropping down onto the grass there in Normandy. Of course, we have members of the royal family in Portsmouth today. Our reporters live in Normandy to watch this. Another plane coming over now. Will people drop out of there? I imagine they will.
And it is, of course, a day that unites people from all sides of the political spectrum. We can forget for a moment we were in a general election campaign. We saw in Portsmouth a little earlier both Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer standing almost next to one another. You'd be forgiven for forgetting they weren't debating yesterday, because it's moments like this where the country can come together, honour our armed forces, both currently serving but also those who fell 80 years ago. But it's not just, of course, about those who fell and made the ultimate sacrifice. It's also about those who courageously fought on, and it was a remarkably successful operation. This isn't just a commemoration for those that fell, it's also a celebration of what was a tremendous moment in Allied and British military history.
Absolutely it is, and there we go, a close-up shot of two of those parachutes coming down to earth there. What a beautiful sight, and there you go, a crowd at the bottom cheering them on as they come into landing there. And we're going to be across all of these commemorations over the next 2 days. We've been there for the preparation. There they are, helping that man get out of his parachute. It's got a bit entangled, but there you go.
It must be said that these are different parachutes to what the paratroopers in the Royal Air Force are used to using. Of course, in today's day and age, we don't have the sort of canopy-style parachutes that were the only way to jump out of aeroplanes back in 1944. We're used to far different shapes, so this is a pretty faithful replication of how those paratroopers landed, and marking this moment for what is a pretty profound anniversary. We've been hearing all week from people who were there on those beaches 80 years ago, and it is remarkable to hear those stories. There are fewer and fewer veterans left from that time, and to be able to hear from them has been a true privilege.
Absolutely. Well, let's bring in our Home and Security Editor, Mark White. Mark, tell us a little bit more about what we're watching here.
Well, what you're seeing is really a tribute to those paratroopers who were involved in dropping into areas behind the beachhead. Effectively, what they were trying to do was to stop the reinforcement of those beaches by Germany. Now, some 18,000 Allied paratroopers were dropped just after midnight on the 6th of June 1944. And many of those paratroopers, as they came down into a nest of vipers, effectively German dugout positions that were shooting them down, some of them dead before they even hit the ground. And a key role, as well as trying to stop Germans from reinforcing those beach areas was also to secure some of the bridges over key rivers along that area in Normandy as well, so that they could, of course, be then used for the Allied advancement. That also exacted a heavy toll on those paratroopers and commandos that were involved in those particular raids. Some dropped by parachute, others were in gliders that landed, some of the gliders smashing up as they came in, killing occupants on board. It was a terrible, bloody episode, not just on the beaches, the 5 beaches of Normandy where those troops were being landed by that mighty armada out in the English Channel, but of course that airborne assault as well. Some 14,000 Allied sorties were flown during that operation on D-Day in support of the ground troops. So it was a huge endeavour, not just by the maritime forces but also the Royal Air Force. A huge endeavour which had taken place for many weeks and months before D-Day as they tried to bomb the supply lines and weaken the German defences, and they had to play a game of subterfuge as well by bombing different locations further up the coast so as not to give it away for the Germans that this was going to be the area that the eventual landings would take place. And that went on, as I say, for many weeks and months before D-Day itself, to try to degrade as much as possible the German army's potential to fight back and resist those advancing Allied forces.
Aeroplanes come across the channel now. We're looking from the ground in Normandy, expecting some more paratroopers to drop out, replicating what happened, Mark, as you say, in the very early hours of the 6th of June 1944. It should be said that on other parts of the coastline in northern France, to distract the Nazi occupying troops, dummy parachutists were dropped out to confuse the Germans' radar systems, to confuse them and distract them. And it's one of these extra examples of distraction, deception and espionage that the British were so good at. These pretend dummy parachute drops that the RAF engaged in, as well as the real ones. But I should say, we are looking at real ones right now.
Yeah, I mean, they were pretty small. They were only about 1.5 feet tall. Anyone that's watched that incredible movie, The Longest Day, will have seen reference made to these dummy paratroopers who, as you say, were launched in their hundreds and thousands to try to deceive the enemy. And of course, at night, and as they landed, they let off firecrackers that gave the impression that this was indeed paratroopers opening fire. And it did. It worked for a while. It fooled the Germans and made them deploy and ensure that their resources were tied up in other areas before they eventually got wise to that. But, you know, all throughout that area, as I was saying, you had paratroopers who were landing in open fields, but of course many landing in villages in the area as well, landing on rooftops and getting stuck in trees, and of course coming down onto machine gun nests in the German dug-in positions, which must have been absolutely horrific for them as they came down trying and hoping that they would reach the ground unscathed. And as of course we know, many just didn't.
And Mark, just as we're watching this picture live from Normandy of these paratroopers jumping out of these aircraft into Normandy, can you tell us a little bit about what's been happening over in Portsmouth and what is scheduled for the rest of the day?
Yeah, well, we had a commemoration service here at Southsea in Portsmouth. A very moving ceremony indeed. We do these spectacles so well in the UK, and it truly was a memorable experience for everybody here, including, of course, about 20 veterans who were given a standing ovation at certain points. There was one veteran who came onto the stage, Ray Hayward, who was in a tank on D-Day, and the weeks afterwards his tank was actually struck, and he told of how he was so badly injured they had to amputate his legs below the knee. Absolutely incredible. He was still able to walk on to the stage despite the fact that not only is he now 99 years old, but of course he is a double amputee, and he got a standing ovation, and he spoke very movingly about those events, and he said he considered himself, despite those life-changing injuries, he considered himself to be one of the lucky ones, because so many thousands of his brother comrades just never came back from D-Day. And we also saw another very moving moment when Eric Bateman, another veteran, came onto the stage, and he was accompanied by two of his great-granddaughters who also spoke to pay tribute to their great-granddad. And that was a very emotional moment for here too. The King spoke, paid tribute to all of those who took part in the D-Day operations, both over in France but here in the UK, in support of that as well. His son, the Prince of Wales, gave a moving tribute, as did the Prime Minister. So many celebrities and VIPs that were here for that commemoration, and it was intertwined by some really beautiful reflective moments when we had music from that time, people dancing, reenacting the GIs that came over during the Second World War to dance with the young English women in towns and villages right across the country. It was a truly amazing event here that I'll certainly remember for a long time, and it was just incredible to see these veterans here still well represented, even though there are fewer than 100 veterans now still alive in the UK.
Wow. Really, really remarkable stuff.